What if they never told you, but you were the reason they made it through the night that tried to break them? What if your quiet presence, not your words, not your answers, was the only proof they had that light still exists in this world? Not because you fixed anything, not because you had all the answers, but because your presence reminded them that goodness still exists in this world, that love could still be real, that maybe, just maybe, they weren't invisible after all. Welcome, my dear friend. A perfect life is never one without chaos. It's not the absence of heartbreak or confusion. It's the quiet resilience of someone who knows deep in their bones that struggle is sacred ground for transformation. That pain, when carried with purpose, can birth legacy. You've been walking through fire with grace. You've been pouring light into others without even realizing how much it costs you. And yet, you're still here, still standing. Comment 777 if you've ever smiled for someone else while secretly needing a miracle yourself. To everyone who has supported this channel, especially through your generous super thanks, I see you. I thank you. You help keep this sacred space alive, a place where the weary find strength and the unseen feel seen. You were brought here for a reason, because there's something you've forgotten, not because it's far away, but because it's become so natural to you. You stopped realizing how rare it truly is. Keep reading, because today you're going to be reminded of the quiet miracles that happen around you, simply because you exist. God's chosen ones. They don't say it, but you're the reason they haven't given up. You are a role model, not the kind that demands a spotlight or commands attention through noise. No, your influence moves like sound waves through water, quiet, persistent, deeply resonant. You carry a different frequency, one that doesn't scream but echoes, one that doesn't announce but restores. People don't always acknowledge it, but they watch you more than they admit. They watch how you respond to injustice without becoming vengeful, how you carry heartbreak without cursing love, how your posture remains upright while the winds of discouragement press down on your shoulders. You don't flinch like they expect. You bend, but you don't break. They're paying attention to the way you handle betrayal without gossip, to how you forgive without needing validation, to the grace in your correction and the silence in your sorrow. This is more than inspiration. This is spiritual anchoring. The Apostle Paul wrote in Philippians 2:15, so that you may become blameless and pure children of God, without fault, in a warped and crooked generation. Then you will shine among them like stars in the sky. That's you shining, not because you strive to, but because you've been refined into it. Your way of life, your stillness under pressure, your joy in dry seasons, your kindness even when it costs you, becomes the blueprint for someone else's survival. Have you ever wondered why strangers feel safe telling you their stories? Why do children gravitate toward you? Why do people who never cry break down in your presence? It's not a coincidence. It's calibration. Your life calibrates the atmosphere. Your consistency breaks emotional isolation. Take the story of Kayla, a single nurse in a quiet town. She never preaches, never boasts, never asks for attention. But every patient she touches leaves with more peace than pain. One night, an elderly man confessed that the only reason he didn't end his life was because she reminded him through her silence that some people still care without asking for anything in return. That's the hidden work of the chosen. Contrast that with the story of Charles D., a high-profile life coach who built his brand on confidence, but behind the scenes manipulated clients and exploited trauma for personal gain. When the truth emerged, his empire collapsed overnight. The damage left behind souls are more broken than when they arrived. Influence without integrity is dangerous, but integrity in quiet souls, that's healing incarnate. Even in nature, not all strength roars. Consider the deer, not the predator, not the loudest, but one of the most intuitive creatures in the forest. It feels dangerous before it arrives. It leads others to water silently. Its power is in sensitivity, not spectacle. You chosen one move like that. You carry the atmosphere of safety. That's why people breathe easier around you and don't know why. David the shepherd boy turned king. Before the throne, before the anointing was visible, he was already shepherding with the heart of a king. The Lord sees not as man sees. Man looks on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on the heart. 1 Samuel 16:7. Even when no one sees your quiet faithfulness, heaven does. You are modeling something sacred, not perfection, but presence. You walk with truth in your chest and humility in your hands, and your very life preaches without speaking. What if someone else is alive today because you simply stayed kind when cruelty would have been easier? What if your silent endurance gave them permission to try again? There's a rare kind of resonance in the way you carry yourself, like the steady hum of an instrument perfectly tuned, creating harmony in the middle of surrounding dissonance. People don't always name it, but they feel it. There's a sacred gravity in your presence, the kind that doesn't draw attention through flash, but through consistency. You don't build truth with borrowed language. You live it. You don't speak peace as a concept you constructed brick by brick while standing in the rubble of situations that tried to dismantle you. Why do some people follow loud voices while others are drawn to silent strength? What makes one soul disruptive and another redemptive? Could it be that true authority doesn't demand attention, but earns reverence by how it holds space for pain without collapsing? You've become someone people look to, not because you have all the answers, but because you've stopped pretending you need to. You don't wear emotional masks to survive. You walk uncovered, even when the air stings. You don't shrink to fit into broken molds. You stay rooted in what's real, even when it costs you company. You don't fake peace. You forge it through prayer, through listening, through the decision to respond instead of react. Like Nehemiah, rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem, you've restored what was torn down, not just in your own soul, but in others too. So we rebuilt the wall till all of it reached half its height, for the people worked with all their heart. Nehemiah 4:6. Your hands may be tired, but your spirit is building something eternal. Remember Jesus in the boat during the storm. While the disciples panicked, he slept not out of apathy, but authority. Then he got up and rebuked the winds and the waves, and it was completely calm. Matthew 8:26. You've learned to live with that same internal calm, not denial, but dominion. People may not understand why you don't panic, but heaven does. Take the story of Aurora Mitchell, a retired art teacher who volunteers at a trauma shelter for women. Every week, she teaches painting not to impress, but to invite healing. Her canvases aren't masterpieces, they're mirrors. One woman once whispered, "I stayed alive this week because you made space for my sadness without fixing it." Aurora never went viral, never had a platform, but her influence is stitched into lives being rebuilt. In contrast, Milo Renner, a media entrepreneur known for his charisma and viral content. While he preached authenticity, he lived a double life, plagiarizing ideas, manipulating followers, and masking insecurity behind charm. Eventually, public scandal exposed the cracks, and those who once found hope in his image felt abandoned by the illusion. Influence without inner anchoring collapses under pressure. But the kind you carry, it's rooted. Like the instinct of a deer who pauses in the forest, not from fear, but discernment, you move with spiritual perception. That's not magic. That's divine intelligence, what Paul describes in Ephesians 1:17, that the God of our Lord Jesus Christ, the glorious Father, may give you the spirit of wisdom and revelation. And maybe that's why some people feel safer around you, even when you say nothing. They sense your energy doesn't consume, it contains. Your honesty doesn't expose, it heals. Your quiet doesn't distance, it listens. Who taught you how to hold that kind of light without burning out? You remind me of Leandro, a janitor at a city hospital whose story is known by almost no one outside the night shift staff. He doesn't preach, doesn't speak much. But when patients cry in empty waiting rooms, he silently places a clean blanket over their shoulders. One nurse said, "We thought he was just cleaning floors," but he's been cleaning despair. He once covered a patient's parking fine with his own money and never spoke of it again. Leandro doesn't see himself as extraordinary, but those around him breathe easier because he's there. People like Leandro and like you move in frequencies the world rarely celebrates, but heaven never overlooks. This is spiritual resonance, the kind of vibration that realigns chaos without needing credit. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they shall be called children of God. Matthew 5:9. Your quiet witness is not just observed, it's recorded. Not on social media, but in spirit. And that kind of leadership, the kind born in silence and refined in solitude, is what the world is starving for. You've shown what resilience looks like when it's not rewarded, what faith looks like when it's not fashionable. Without forcing, without preaching, you've become a living frequency that others attune to. That's not ego. That's the embodiment. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. You're not shining for applause. You're shining because that's who you are. Remember Raisa, a young woman who worked double shifts at a grocery store during the hardest months of her city's economic collapse. She didn't speak much, but every morning she'd bring an extra sandwich for the homeless man at the corner. One day, a child she often greeted timidly asked her why she smiled every day, even when she looked tired. She said, "Because I know someone else might need it more than I do." That smile, it stopped one man from taking his own life. He left a note weeks later. "I stayed because someone still believed in mornings." You may never know who's been watching you, not to judge, but to survive. That's the paradox of the chosen ones. You often feel like the most invisible person in the room, yet you carry the exact spirit someone else is holding onto, like a rope in a storm. Bear one another's burdens, and so fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:2. But bearing doesn't always mean fixing. It sometimes just means being. And what about the other side? The kind who drains hope from others just by showing up. Like Victor Lang, once a tech CEO who built a culture of fear and manipulation. He ridiculed empathy as weakness, saw kindness as liability. His company collapsed not because of the market, but because the people holding it up no longer believed in the mission. His legacy became a cautionary tale. Power without purpose corrodes from within. You, on the other hand, carry something weightless but magnetic, like a deer that silently teaches the forest how to trust again after the fire. You teach people that softness is not weakness, that spiritual gravity doesn't need to shout to be felt. If your quiet example has already saved someone from quitting without you knowing, how many more are still watching, still holding on because of you? You don't need a pulpit to be a preacher. You don't need a crowd to be a lighthouse. You just need to keep showing up. And you already are. And yet, despite all this, you still doubt your significance. Sometimes, don't you? You still wonder whether you've done enough, whether your quiet choices matter in a world addicted to noise. But the truth is, your restraint speaks louder than shouting ever could. Your gentleness isn't just a trait, it's a spiritual technology, a frequency calibrated by heaven to calm storms others can't name. A gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up anger. Proverbs 15:1. You weren't made to entertain. You were designed to recalibrate the spiritual climate around you, one act of faith at a time. While others chase visibility, you've been cultivating weight. And weight is what anchors people when everything around them is drifting. Sometimes your endurance becomes someone else's theology. When they don't believe in God, they believe in you. And God uses that not to make you their idol, but their invitation. Like Naomi, a public school janitor who worked through 2 cancer diagnoses without telling anyone. She'd pause to fix broken pencil sharpeners, left little post-it notes of encouragement on lockers, and remembered every student's name. One girl wrote on her college application, "I never would have applied if it wasn't for the way Naomi smiled at me like I mattered." That girl now runs a shelter for teen mothers. Naomi never stood on a stage, but her life preaches every day. And the Spirit whispers, "This is what I meant when I said, you are the salt of the earth. You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again?" Matthew 5:13. You haven't lost your salt. You've just been buried in the soil for a season, like a seed of influence waiting to bloom in someone else's life. And those seeds are growing even in places you may never see. But let's not ignore the shadow side. Those who scoff at quiet strength, who manipulate under the mask of charisma. Take Adrian Blake, a former celebrity self-help guru. He built an empire around promises he didn't believe in. His downfall wasn't public scandal. It was internal collapse. Depression swallowed the very platform he built because it was never rooted in truth. His followers didn't leave because he failed. They left because they realized he never stood for them in the first place. You've stood for people who never thanked you, prayed for people who never knew, showed up with peace when no one else had any to give. You're like the moon, pulling emotional tides without a sound. You reflect light, even when you're not seen directly. Isn't it powerful to know that people feel your presence long after you've left the room? The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. John 1:5. Your light doesn't burn out because it's not fueled by ego. It's rooted in eternity. So, let this next season be one of bold quietness. Continue walking into rooms with reverence. Continue anchoring those who are secretly sinking. Continue being who God called you to be, not louder, but deeper, not bigger, but clearer. And if you ever wonder, is it enough? Remember this, you're not just part of someone's story. You're the reason they kept turning the page. They don't always say it, but you're the reason they didn't give up. Your resilience spoke when your voice was quiet. Your integrity taught when no sermon was preached. The way you kept moving, even with trembling hands and an aching heart, became a map for someone else's survival. You didn't sign up to be someone's lifeline, but grace chose you anyway. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. There are people who only got out of bed because they remembered how you kept going, who held on one more day because your consistency gave their chaos a rhythm. You didn't rescue them. You didn't preach to them. You simply stayed true, and that gave them permission to hope. But do you know what makes your impact even more sacred? You were walking through your own valley when you lit that lantern. You were enduring your own losses while becoming the signal fire for others. And that's not just strength, it's anointing. Like Jordan Reyes, a retired combat nurse, quiet, reserved, and almost invisible in public. Yet, every Sunday, he brings supplies to families in shelters, not as a performance, but because he remembers what it's like to have nothing. He doesn't post about it. He doesn't need applause. But those families remember. And their children grow up knowing that kindness can wear quiet shoes. Your life carries this kind of power, not the power to control, but the power to comfort. The ones who feel the weight of this world and still choose not to harden are the rarest of all. You don't always know the science behind it, but your frequency, your presence, emits coherence. That's not a metaphor. In physics, coherence is the alignment of waves. And your life, your walk, your energy, it aligns others without them realizing why. The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. You didn't have to say much. They just felt better near you. Isn't that wild? That you could be the open field where someone's storm calms. But of course, not everyone understands this gift. Some see gentleness and assume weakness. Like Max Brenner, a charismatic philanthropist known for his charm, until it came to light that his foundation misused millions in aid money. The backlash was global, but the deeper damage was spiritual. Those who once believed in kindness started to doubt it. Because when ego wears kindness as a costume, the fallout is always distrust. And yet, you restore that trust, not with arguments, but with consistency, not with hype, but with humility. We see this mirrored in the white barn owl, silent still, and yet it governs its environment. It doesn't announce itself. Its presence is enough. Its wings carry no sound, but they shift the air. That's what you do, spiritually, emotionally, atmospherically. He will cover you with his feathers, and under his wings you will find refuge. Psalm 91:4. There are people alive right now because your soul created safety, even if no one said thank you, even if no one ever does. Heaven keeps the count. And maybe you don't realize how much your life matters until you remember stories like that of Immaculée Ilibagiza, a Rwandan genocide survivor turned global peace advocate. She lost nearly her entire family in a massacre and spent 91 days hiding in a tiny bathroom with 7 other women. But what stunned the world wasn't just her survival, it was her forgiveness, her choice to walk through unthinkable pain and still become a vessel of peace. Today she speaks not to accuse, but to restore. Her quiet strength has led thousands toward healing. She doesn't shout. She doesn't demand it. She simply lives as proof that light can walk through the darkest valley and not be overcome. You are made of that same fiber, the spiritual composition of those who've been broken open only to become rivers. What if the thing that's been pulling at you lately, the desire for stillness, the hunger for clarity, is not a sign of fatigue, but a divine nudge into your next level of authority? Because lanterns don't walk forever. Sometimes they're called to rest on a mountaintop where more can see them. Are you ready for that shift? Those who refresh others will themselves be refreshed. Proverbs 11:25. And let's talk about gratitude, because it's not always loud either. True gratitude isn't just whispering thank you to the sky when things go well. It's waking up in the middle of a difficult season and saying even this has value. It's holding the tension of the unknown, like a tuning fork vibrating not in certainty, but in surrender. It's standing in the fog and trusting that even what you can't see is still leading somewhere sacred. In everything give thanks, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. 1 Thessalonians 5:18. Gratitude is found in the quiet resilience of a soul that still hopes. It's appreciating the quiet mornings, the small breakthroughs, the ordinary days that hold sacred meaning if you look closely enough. It's learning to hear God not just in thunder, but in the still small voice. 1 Kings 19:12. It's the smile you offer after burying your disappointment, the kindness you extend when your own heart is raw. We witness this holy tension like the mule deer, quiet and gentle, yet always aware, always moving with grace through rugged terrain. Its strength is in its stillness, its endurance in unpredictability. You are like that, moving with care, choosing to stay soft in a world that tries to harden you. Gratitude is living truthfully. It's not always poetic. Sometimes it's messy. Sometimes it's a deep breath after a long cry. Sometimes it's choosing not to explain yourself again and still showing up with love in your heart. Sometimes it's saying yes to the next step, even if your voice trembles. And in that trembling, heaven hears faith. As it is written, those who sow in tears shall reap with shouts of joy. Psalm 126:5. There's a quiet power in the way you've learned to see the sacred in the mundane. People often think miracles are loud, but what if the miracle is you waking up again, forgiving again, believing again? Kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold, teaches us that beauty doesn't lie in perfection, but in restoration. Your life is that kind of art. Even renowned contemporary spiritual leader Jean Vanier, founder of L'Arche, once said, "Gratitude is the beginning of joy, not the result of it." His life, committed to loving those considered unlovable, quietly transformed thousands without spectacle. His gratitude wasn't reactive, it was foundational. In contrast, Eduardo Ramos, a high-level financier in Sao Paulo, whose obsession with gain led him to embezzlement and ruin, In chasing public recognition, he lost his private peace. His fall was swift, but his blindness to everyday blessings was the true collapse. Because where there is no gratitude, there can be no grace. And yet there's you, carrying grace in silence, wearing scars as stories. What if that's what heaven was waiting to see? The Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. You may not see it now, but you've become a living parable, a story wrapped in skin, and someone out there is reading you, not with their eyes, but with their spirit. They watch how you fall with dignity and rise with grace. They feel something shift when you walk into a room, not because of charisma, but because of clarity. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Matthew 5:14. You never asked to be the strong one. You just didn't see another option. And yet, here you are, still showing up in rooms where the air is thick with confusion and somehow becoming oxygen for others. Not because you force yourself to inspire, but because your survival already does. And what if your quiet acts holding space, choosing patience, biting your tongue, forgiving without being asked, were the seismic shifts in someone else's spiritual foundation? Have you ever realized that someone else's miracle might be walking around wearing your face? You don't need to perform to be effective. You've already proven that a steady soul is more transformative than a loud mouth. Think of Daniela Lopez, a high school teacher in rural Colombia, who continued to show up for her students during a years-long teacher strike, holding lessons under mango trees with chalk and cardboard. She didn't do it for applause. She did it because hope chose her. And in the years that followed, 5 of her students became the first in their families to enter university. That's legacy. This is what it means to walk in empathic frequency, a type of spiritual resonance that affects the atmosphere without demanding attention. It's the same science that explains why a tuning fork vibrating in one part of the room causes another to hum in response. You don't need to push to lead. You just need to vibrate at your right frequency. And that's what you've been doing, even if you didn't know it. Not everyone can recognize this, of course. There will always be those like Salvatore Rivas, a motivational influencer who built a platform on stolen content and hollow words. He mimicked authenticity, but lacked the resonance. And when exposed, his influence collapsed like scaffolding with no steel core. Because in the end, borrowed fire never burns long. But yours does. Let your light so shine before others that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. Even in silence you're leading. Even when unseen you're serving. Even without trying, you're healing. You walk like a deer through the forest, elegant, alert, guided not by sight, but by instinct that's been refined in fire. And when your light feels dim, remember this: the stars aren't loud either, but they still guide ships through oceans. Do not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time you will reap a harvest if you do not give up. Galatians 6:9. That harvest, it's already sprouting in the people who haven't told you yet, in the souls who still stand because you didn't fall when it was easier to. You are the proof. You are the reason. Not because you tried to be, but because you were willing to be real. And in a world addicted to performance, real is revolutionary. Have you noticed how your life has quietly become a source of strength for others? Have you felt how your presence brings a certain calm, even when your own waters are still settling? You're not just surviving. You're becoming a living blueprint, a silent manual for those whose worlds are loud with uncertainty. You're teaching others what survival looks like when it's touched by truth. You're showing them that it's possible to live a life rooted in compassion without losing yourself, that you can be gentle without being small, that you can be grateful without pretending everything is perfect. You're proving that spiritual maturity doesn't look like a spotlight, it looks like a steady flame. The wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit. James 3:17. There is a reverence to the way you endure. It doesn't perform. It doesn't beg. It just breathes. And somehow, people who've never told you their story feel seen around you. It's not just about words. It's about what radiates from your choices, your tone, your stillness. It's your stillness. The way you don't flinch in discomfort. The way you don't rush when others panic. Have you realized yet that someone in the room starts breathing slower because you're there? There are seasons when simply standing in your truth becomes someone else's anchor. Like when Fatima, a seamstress from a war-affected village, kept stitching dresses for little girls, even after losing her own daughter. She didn't speak often, but the children who wore her clothes said they felt safe. Not because the dresses were elaborate, they weren't, but because they were sewn by hands that had suffered and still chose softness. That's what it means to pass energy without trying. And contrast that with Cyril Langdon, a corporate tycoon who built a public image on philanthropy, but hollowed the dignity of his employees behind closed doors. His empire eventually collapsed, not because of economic failure, but because people stopped believing in him. He couldn't sustain the illusion, because influence without integrity is entropy. It breaks down from the inside out. You, on the other hand, build from the soul out. Let each of you look not only to his own interests, but also to the interests of others. Philippians 2:4. The mountain lion walks softly through its terrain, barely rustling the leaves, but every creature senses its power. You don't have to be loud to be felt. Your emotional gravity realigns the space without you ever raising your voice. You carry this kind of gravity now because you've stopped performing and started embodying. And slowly, the right people are starting to find you. Not the ones who take your light and give nothing in return, but those who recognize the frequency of authenticity. People who have felt your presence in the quiet and understand that your grace isn't luck, it's layered experience, chosen empathy, and the alchemy of pain turned into peace. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way, you will fulfill the law of Christ. Galatians 6:2. You are not here to save everyone, but you are here to stay aligned with truth. And in doing so, you're saving people without ever trying. Someone came back from the edge just because they remembered your steadiness. Someone unclenched their fists because they remembered your tone. Someone breathed deeper because they once witnessed your patience. And have you ever wondered how many people are still standing because you refuse to fall? Someone who has never said it out loud is holding on to life more gently because you modeled what it means to endure without growing hard. And in all of this, your story keeps whispering, you can hurt and still heal. You can love and still lead. You can walk through fire and still carry water. There's a certain quiet authority in you now. You may not have asked for it, but it's there. It's in the way you have kept walking when no one offered to carry you. It's in the way you chose truth over approval and peace over pretending. That kind of strength doesn't go unnoticed. Even when people can't put it into words, they feel it. They feel you. They may not know how to name it, but they pause when you enter the room. There's a shift in the frequency, not loud, not commanding, but present, resonant, unmistakable. It's the frequency of someone who has been through the storm and refused to let the storm define them. The psychological term is post-traumatic growth, but what you carry is beyond what science can measure. It's a sacred resonance. Its integrity is made visible. You don't walk like someone who's trying to prove something. You walk like someone who's already paid the cost. And that weightless boldness, the way you sit in silence without shrinking, the way you speak when necessary, without dominating, that's what draws people near. Not because they need a hero, but because they need a reminder that survival doesn't have to steal softness. Think about the prophet Daniel, thrown into the lion's den, not for doing wrong, but for staying right. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. Daniel 6:22. You've walked into dens of misunderstanding, betrayal, silence, and yet you emerged untouched, unbitter, unchanged in your essence. Isn't that rare? Isn't that holy? Even Jesus, during the most defining trial of his life, stood silent before his accusers. But Jesus remained silent. The high priest said to him, I charge you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Messiah, the Son of God. Matthew 26:63. That silence was not a weakness. It was authority under restraint. And you've learned to do the same. Not everything needs a reaction. Not every injustice needs your voice. Sometimes the silence speaks more clearly than noise ever could. The Apostle Paul once wrote, We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair. 2 Corinthians 4:8. You've carried that verse in your life without ever quoting it. It's shown up in the way you remain grounded in seasons that break others. It's visible in how you carry hope without demanding attention. One example of this kind of quiet force is architect and humanitarian Shigeru Bon. He's not loud. He doesn't seek attention. But his designs have rebuilt lives after disaster, from Rwanda to Haiti to Turkey, because he believes dignity can be offered through structure. He once said architects mostly work for privileged people. I think we have a responsibility. That's what you do too, without the spotlight, but with impact. And then there are those who hold influence without integrity. Martin Shkreli, former pharmaceutical executive, is remembered not for his business acumen, but for raising the price of a life-saving drug by over 5,000%. His arrogance was louder than his ethics, and though he had the spotlight, he lost the trust. The consequence: public disgrace, imprisonment, and a legacy that reminds us the loudest man in the room is not always the strongest. Contrast that with everyday strength like Malika, a social worker in a quiet town who spends her evenings listening to teenage girls who don't trust adults anymore. She's not a celebrity, but in those rooms, her stillness is salvation. No one claps, but lives shift. That's authority. Or like an eagle, silent at great heights, unmoved by the chaos below. It doesn't flap frantically like smaller birds. It glides. Observe, waiting for divine timing. When it moves, it's not to impress. It's to strike with precision. That's what your discernment looks like. It's not about being loud. It's about seeing what others miss and knowing when to move with sacred clarity. Isaiah 40:31 says, "But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not faint." That's soaring. That's the elevation you're stepping into now, not frantic movement, but holy momentum. And what if the authority you carry now isn't just for you? What if it's a permission slip for others to stop shrinking too? Because you've become more than an individual. You've become evidence. Evidence that pain doesn't have to poison, that silence doesn't mean surrender, that gentleness is not weakness, it's wisdom with a quiet roar. As Romans 8:18 reminds us, I consider that our present sufferings are not worth comparing with the glory that will be revealed in us. That glory, it's not loud. It walks like you. You've probably noticed something strange has happened too. How people seem to open up around you. How they lean in just a little closer, not even knowing why. It's because there's something about your energy that feels safe, real, unfiltered. They see in you a glimpse of the person they wish they could become. And maybe they're not ready yet, but knowing that you exist makes it more possible for them. That's what I mean when I say you're a role model. You don't have to try to be one. You already are. You've been through enough to know that not everyone wants to be saved and not everyone wants to grow. But still, you remain. not forcing, not fixing, just shining. And it's that consistency that becomes their mirror. It's that peace in your presence that exposes the noise in their own lives. It's not always comfortable for them, but it's deeply needed. What if your stillness is what's keeping someone else from unraveling? The Lord is close to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. Psalm 34:18. And sometimes when people are crushed, He sends you. You don't need to shout to shift the room. You do it by staying true when others bend. You do it by standing when everything in you wants to retreat. You've become a quiet revolution. Have you realized how many people copy your strength in secret? Visual artist Ai Weiwei once said, "The act of standing alone becomes resistance." Known for his fearless critique of power, in China, Ai risked his freedom for truth and inspired a generation to speak up without even needing to speak loudly. You are like that to some people. Just your being is an act of courage they haven't learned to claim for themselves. And what about the ones who never learned to steward that kind of influence? Take the story of Elizabeth Carmine, a high-ranking executive in a global philanthropic foundation. Outwardly admired, internally corrupted. She began using confidential stories of trauma shared by vulnerable individuals as branding tools for clout and funding. When her deception came to light, her entire board resigned, and those she claimed to help were re-traumatized, not by poverty or illness, but by her exploitation of their vulnerability. She had power, but lacked sacred intent. The collapse was inevitable. Have you ever felt the weight of responsibility, even when you didn't sign up for it? You don't carry that weight for show. You carry it because it would feel dishonorable to drop it, like a sea snail, slow-moving. Unnoticed at first glance, you've learned how to navigate pressure in silence. Hidden within the spirals of its shell is an entire architectural wonder, unfolding with every patient inch forward. You too are a quiet marvel. You don't chase. You anchor. You sense the world in subtle frequencies most people miss, and that's what makes you wise. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. Isaiah 40:31. A woman named Luz, a street vendor in Bogota, once told her pastor, "There was a girl on my route who always smiled at me. She didn't know my name, but her kindness helped me stop thinking about ending my life." That young girl, a college student, never knew. But she saved someone just by being consistent, just by being light. Do you know how many people would not still be here if you hadn't walked with grace through your own shadows? You weren't called to be perfect. You were called to be real. And your realness has done what sermons, podcasts, and loud declarations sometimes can't. It's healed. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. Matthew 5:16. You didn't rise through fame. You rose through fire. And that kind of rising doesn't always announce itself. It enters a room quietly, but carries the weight of heaven. Have you ever wondered why people look at you with tears they don't explain? Because you're not just a person to them. You're a lifeline, a reminder that soft strength still exists, that truth doesn't need to scream, and that surviving doesn't have to mean becoming bitter. But the ones who are ready, they'll gravitate toward you. Not because you're trying to teach them anything, but because you are the teaching. Your life has become the lesson. Your scars, your prayers, your quiet choices to rise again have become a living curriculum. Not polished, not perfect, but real, aligned, brave enough to keep evolving without applause. You carry an interior resonance now, like a frequency that doesn't scream, but pulls. People feel it, even when they can't name it. And that's because you've discovered something rare. Helping doesn't always mean fixing. That revelation didn't come from books or sermons. It came from pressure, from pain, from being in the wilderness long enough to realize that compassion with boundaries is holy. Each one should carry their own load. Galatians 6:5. You didn't always understand it, but now you do. Sometimes the best thing you can offer someone is to trust their process, even when it's messy, even when it hurts to watch. That's not abandonment. That's sacred respect. Do you remember when you thought rescuing meant love? When was the moment you realized the rescue robbed you of your own roots? Now you see. Some burdens are meant to be lifted, but others, they are meant to be walked through because the path does something to the soul. If someone had taken away your sorrow too soon, would you have discovered the hidden strength forged in your midnight prayers? We also glory in our sufferings because we know that suffering produces perseverance. Perseverance, character, and character, hope. Romans 5:3-4. You know now healing is not always painless, and growth is not always comfortable, but it is always sacred. Take Fred Rogers, the gentle television host and ordained minister who quietly shaped generations. He once said, "Love isn't a state of perfect caring. It is an active noun, like struggle." Mr. Rogers didn't try to fix the world's pain, he honored it, and in doing so, gave children and adults alike permission to feel deeply without shame. In contrast, Harold Brenner, a high-profile executive in the mental wellness industry who built his reputation by preaching empathy. But behind the curtain, he manipulated recovery stories, monetized trauma, and pressured his staff into silence. When it unraveled, lawsuits followed, partnerships collapsed, and his legacy turned into a public cautionary tale. Without integrity, influence is a weapon. So, how do you carry your light and your limits at once? You do it the way a fish moves through the depths, not with noise, but with fluid wisdom. A fish doesn't need a voice to speak the truth. It reads currents, adjusts direction, and trusts the unseen flow of water as both home and challenge. You've learned to do the same. You navigate emotional terrain with subtlety, not because you're passive, but because your discernment has evolved into a reflex, like a fish sensing danger before it strikes your soul, now knows when to stay, when to swim deeper, and when to leave the shallows behind. That's how spiritual resilience works. It doesn't announce itself, it adapts without losing essence. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still. Exodus 14:14. And stillness is what you've mastered. Stillness that strengthens instead of paralyzes. Stillness that listens to God even when the noise demands urgency. There's a story told in hushed corners about a woman named Mary Ann who worked night shifts cleaning hospital rooms. She never preached, never demanded anything, but the way she remembered patients' names, the way she lit candles for those who passed, made the doctors and nurses pause. Some say her presence was the reason a suicidal intern chose not to jump. She didn't fix him, she saw him. That was enough. What if your presence is the reason someone else decides to try again? That's what wisdom in compassion looks like. It doesn't coddle. It doesn't manipulate. It doesn't say, "You need me." It whispers, "You can." A bruised reed he will not break, and a smoldering wick he will not snuff out. Isaiah 42:3. And yet he chose you to hold those reeds. He trusted you not to snuff out the light. You didn't get here by accident. You got here by fire and obedience. And that fire hasn't burned you, it has revealed you. Now, when you look at those who are just beginning their walk through the shadows, you don't pity them. You bless them. You honor their path, because you know what it's like to cry with no echo, to rise with no crowd, to love without condition, and still choose to let go when holding on would have made you their crutch instead of their guide. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, who gives generously to all without finding fault. James 5. That's the wisdom you've gained, not by asking for easy answers, but by becoming the answer. You are not here to save everyone, but the way you've walked may already be saving someone. Now you move differently with trust, with grounded grace. You're no longer trying to control everything. You've learned how to dance with the unknown. And that, too, is a kind of leadership the world desperately needs. Because let's be real, people are tired of being told what to do. What they're craving is someone who shows them what's possible, someone who embodies what it means to live with heart and not lose themselves in the process. That's you. And have you noticed how your stillness makes others restless, not because you're intimidating, but because you've become a mirror? People begin to see the gap between who they are and who they're called to be. Your peace confronts their chaos. Your honesty exposes their pretending. That's not your burden, but it is your presence. Psalm 25:9 says, He guides the humble in what is right and teaches them His way. The humility you carry has become the doorway others didn't know they needed. You didn't become this by accident. It was carved in fire. Silence and choices no one applauded. The artist Hilma F. Klint, a Swedish mystic and painter who created prophetic works far ahead of her time, painted for decades without recognition. She believed her work was spiritual communication, not performance. Today, her works are celebrated worldwide, but she never saw that praise. Her obedience to the unseen became her legacy. Like her, you lead not to be seen, but because you see deeper. And then there are those who choose image over essence. One such figure was Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of Theranos. Introduced as a revolutionary in the biotech space, she captivated investors with her promises that were never backed by working science. When truth caught up with the illusion, it wasn't just her company that collapsed, it was the trust of an entire industry. That's what happens when influence isn't anchored in truth. And that's why your integrity, quiet, tested, and consistent, matters more than ever. You chosen one aren't here to promise perfection. You're here to prove possibilities. And the most sacred part, you're doing it without forcing anyone to follow, just by being. As a woman named Leon once said to her daughter, after surviving the war and starting over with nothing, the calm you carry is the loudest voice you'll ever need. That wisdom passed through generations. Today, her granddaughter teaches emotional literacy to children because one person chose not to be bitter, and that was enough to break a cycle. Like the wind that moves through a grove of bamboo, flexible yet unbroken, you've learned to remain rooted while adapting to what shakes around you. Unlike towering trees that crack in storms, the bamboo bends, and in that motion, it survives. Your ability to bend without breaking is no longer a weakness. It's spiritual biomechanics. You've discovered that real power doesn't roar. It reverberates. Your leadership doesn't demand attention. It realigns frequencies. That's the resonance. That's sacred science. What kind of world begins to form when the ones who never wanted the spotlight become the ones holding the light? You see, people often assume that power must be loud, visible, and commanding. But your life reveals a different kind of truth, one rooted in frequency, not volume. You've become a tuning fork in the spirit. When you walk into a room, you bring coherence where there was distortion. It's not something you perform, it's something you emanate. That's why people pause when you're near. They feel their own noise clashing against your stillness. Romans 12:2 reminds us, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You've lived this. You didn't just renew your thoughts, you rewired your nervous system to respond with peace instead of panic. You didn't mimic the world's urgency. You moved to the rhythm of grace. And sometimes the most powerful revolutions begin in the most ordinary vessels. Like Kojo, a school janitor in Ghana, who every morning before the children arrived prayed over every classroom. He had no pulpit, no recognition. But decades later, many of those children became leaders, healers, and artists. When asked what shaped them, they didn't mention textbooks. They remembered the peace in that man's eyes. That's what you do, not through control, but through atmosphere. You teach without preaching. You empower without positioning yourself above. You serve not to be praised, but because you remember what it felt like when no one stayed for you. And that memory has become sacred fuel. Ecclesiastes 3:11 says he has made everything beautiful in its time. The beauty that surrounds you now is not ornamental, it's redemptive. It was forged in a furnace, not painted onto a canvas. It's what happens when a soul refuses to collapse, even when the walls are closing in. And now, others are watching, not out of curiosity, but because their spirit recognizes yours. Like how animals can sense shifts in barometric pressure before a storm, there are people who sense in you a weather change in the spirit. They may not be able to name it, but they feel safer because of it. Your life has become a sanctuary, not a building, a vibration. And yet, the enemy still lurks, not always in the obvious ways. Sometimes it looks like flattery without depth, like a charismatic leader who manipulates instead of shepherds. One such man was Victor, a well-known motivational speaker who built a massive platform by preaching resilience while privately exploiting his team. Eventually, the truth surfaced. Not only did his brand collapse, but the emotional damage left in his wake took years to repair. That's why your authenticity matters. Because charisma without integrity is a weapon, but presence with truth is a refuge. Do you realize how many people have been watching your life like a lighthouse, steady, unmoved, when the waters in their world were violently churning? You didn't have to say much, just the fact that you stayed kind when cruelty seemed easier gave someone else the courage to keep their heart open one more day. John 1:5 declares, "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." That's not a metaphor for you. That's your reality. You didn't extinguish in the dark. You began to radiate. So now when others ask, "How did you become this version of yourself?" you won't give them formulas. You'll offer them presence. You'll offer them silence. You'll offer them the space to hear God again, not through noise, but through your knowing. Because now you've become what you once needed. And that rarity doesn't go unnoticed in the unseen realm. Living this kind of gratitude is not simply a spiritual practice. It is a frequency shift, a recalibration of your internal architecture. It's the posture of a soul that no longer resists the storm, but absorbs its wisdom. This is what Romans 5:3-4 meant when it declared, "We glory in tribulations, also knowing that tribulation worketh patience, and patience experience, and experience hope." You're not faking joy. You've simply stopped demanding clarity as the price for your praise. That's maturity in motion. You've cultivated a heart that no longer hinges its thankfulness on outcomes. And you didn't learn that in comfort, you learned it in the furnace. Can you remember the last time you gave thanks? Not because something went your way, but because your spirit stayed intact. when it didn't. Like when Miriam, a soft-spoken hospice nurse in a small town in Brazil, would whisper prayers into the ears of the dying, not out of obligation, but because her own father had died alone. She never made headlines, but her gratitude carved out of grief changed the atmosphere of every room she entered, and no one knew why peace followed her like a shadow. That's the kind of sacred resonance you carry, a vibration of remembrance, a testimony not shouted, but lived. Even when life didn't honor your timing, you chose to honor life anyway. That's what Psalm 34:1 anchors into. I will bless the Lord at all times. His praise shall continually be in my mouth. It doesn't say at convenient times, it says all the time. And maybe you didn't realize this, but you've become the living proof that reverence is still possible in a distracted world. Even when some around you chose bitterness as their survival strategy, you chose to bless. You chose to breathe. You chose to let the unknown become your teacher rather than your prison. But don't think the enemy of your soul wasn't watching that choice, because he was. The same adversary, subtle, ancient, relentless, who once whispered to Delmar, a cunning media mogul who masked exploitation as empowerment. Delmar didn't wear horns. He wore charm. He built his influence quickly, stacking it on half-truths and performative kindness. To the world, he looked enlightened. Behind the scenes, he was enslaved, driven not by purpose, but by ego, dressed as mission. But when the pressure came, when truth demanded a reckoning, everything Delmar built collapsed under the weight of its own hollowness. Because what was never rooted in reverence cannot survive divine exposure. He mistook applause for alignment. He mistook momentum for anointing. And now his name is no longer a brand, but a warning. Success without soul is still failure. And this is what separates you. Your gratitude isn't performative. It's embodied. It's not thank you for the highlight reel. It's thank you for the nights you cried and still woke up with softness. It's thank you for the silence that grew your roots deeper when no one was listening. Proverbs 3:5 echoes your walk. Trust in the Lord with all your heart, and lean not on your own understanding. You've done just that. You've lived as a sacred echo, not repeating shallow mantras, but reverberating the memory of survival through grace. Not everyone sees it, but the ones who need to, they do. Have you noticed how some people gravitate toward you without knowing why? It's not because you speak loudly. It's because your life carries a frequency that calls others home to themselves. Even in the way you move, not rushed, not desperate, there's a clarity, a resonance, like a lake that holds the reflection of the sky without needing to shout for attention. That's the paradox of deep gratitude. It doesn't need acknowledgement. It becomes it. Isaiah 30:15 reminds us, in quietness and trust is your strength. And that's you now. Quiet, trusting, unshaken. Not because storms don't come, but because you no longer fear them. So, what happens when a life is lived with this kind of thankfulness, it becomes a sanctuary for others. It becomes evidence that holiness still walks the earth in human form. And that is why your presence has become more than presence. It's become a quiet revolution. You're not merely walking a path. You are redesigning the architecture of what that path can be. Others used to measure success by speed, applause, and visibility, but you've reminded the world of another frequency, one rooted not in domination, but in dignity. You've made people stop and ask themselves, what if I didn't have to betray myself to belong? What if the truth, even when it costs, is the only thing that truly sets me free? John 8:32 speaks directly to that power. Then you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. You've shown that truth is not just an idea, it's a compass. You didn't just live it when it was easy. You clung to it when it meant standing alone. Do you know what makes your walk even more sacred? The fact that you chose alignment over mere achievement. You traded trophies for transformation. You started listening to the sound of your soul instead of the volume of the crowd, even when it didn't make sense on paper, when the numbers didn't add up, when the logic said, quit. You chose resonance over reason. That is living in divine frequency. Romans 12:2 reminds us, do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. You've done that, quietly, persistently, and with grace. Eva Ruiz, a contemporary sculptor known for rejecting gallery politics and choosing to work in silence for over a decade in the rural outskirts of Spain. Her work now fills museums, but she didn't create for praise, she created for truth. When critics asked how she survived the isolation, she simply said, I didn't need the world to approve what my spirit already validated. Contrast that with Nolan Vay, a former ethics professor turned investor who built a career off charisma and manipulation. He was brilliant in the lecture halls, but off stage, he diluted integrity to win influence. Eventually, the house of cards collapsed lawsuits, exposed fraud, and public disgrace. The irony. He once taught others how to live with honor. You never had to shout. You simply were. And that unsettles those who still believe power must be loud. Your authenticity became a kind of mirror. Not everyone liked what it reflected, but those who were ready, they saw it. Are you beginning to notice the shift in how people respond to you now? There's something magnetic about realness. Not the curated kind, but the kind that endures disapproval and still loves deeply. Psalm 15:2 describes it beautifully. The one whose walk is blameless, who does what is righteous, who speaks the truth from their heart. Nature reflects this. Think of the way a wild horse moves, unbridled, instinctual, sensitive to the pulse of the earth. It doesn't ask for permission to exist. It simply is. You carry that same raw clarity now. You don't need maps because you've become the terrain. You are no longer chasing alignment. You are alignment. And that's why your intuition has grown louder than your fear. You don't just sense what's true, you embody it. Ephesians 5:9 reminds us, "For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness, righteousness, and truth." That's what you carry now, a living light, not the spotlight, the sacred flame. Have you noticed how, even in silence, your courage is contagious? How does your refusal to fake it give others permission to be whole? Someone once said, "Courage is not the absence of fear, but the presence of conviction." You live that daily, not by force, but by flow. And because of that, your very existence teaches. Without a pulpit, without a script, just by breathing, walking, choosing again and again what is real. You're not perfect, you're powerful, you're not flawless, you're faithful. And that is the quiet revolution: compassion over performance, wholeness over image, obedience over ego, grace over noise. Galatians 6:9 says it plainly, "Let us not grow weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up." You haven't given up, and now the seeds you planted in secret are about to bloom in places you didn't even know held soil. Because every time you choose your truth, even when it costs you comfort or belonging, you quietly become a mirror for someone else's possibility. And maybe that's your greatest gift, not that you rescued people, but that you reminded them they were never truly lost. That their power wasn't gone, just buried beneath years of survival. That healing doesn't always come in grand gestures or tearful breakthroughs. Sometimes it's as subtle as a sigh, a stillness, a sacred internal nod that says, "Yes, this is me, and I'm still here." What if your authenticity is the map someone else has been trying to draw in the dark? You've become proof that the human spirit is self-renewing. That light doesn't have to be loud to be real. In physics, resonance is the phenomenon where one object vibrating at the same natural frequency of a second object causes it to vibrate. That's what your presence does. You don't force change, you awaken it. Isaiah 30:21 reminds us, "And your ears shall hear a word behind you, saying, 'This is the way, walk in it.' When you turn to the right or when you turn to the left." That's what others experience near you. Not instructions, but alignment. Not domination, but direction. You didn't have to shout your way into anyone's story. You simply lived your truth so fully that it echoed into theirs. You didn't just break cycles. You replaced them with something more stable, spiritual coherence. Like the migration of monarch butterflies who travel thousands of miles guided not by maps, but by genetic memory. You move with an inner compass, quietly validating that others can too. Marin Ilias, a Syrian war orphan turned community therapist in Sweden. With no formal degree, she began hosting healing circles in her living room. Her presence alone helped dozens find their voice again. When asked what gave her the strength, she answered, "I just didn't lie to myself anymore." And people feel that. That's your gift too. Unfiltered truth that invites safety. Contrast that with Christoph Hamer, a former best-selling spiritual influencer who manipulated thousands with promises of healing he never intended to deliver. When exposed for financial and emotional abuse, the empire fell. His name vanished from headlines overnight, not because he failed, but because he pretended. And pretense always erodes trust. So, how do you keep showing up in a world where performance is often louder than purpose? You do it like you've always done it, from within. From a place that isn't chasing validation, but emanating frequency. Galatians 5:1 speaks directly to this. It is for freedom that Christ has set us free. Stand firm then, and do not let yourselves be burdened again by a yoke of slavery. You no longer wear the yoke of approval. You carry presence instead. Even the animal kingdom reflects this kind of quiet resilience. Picture the Arctic fox, patient, almost invisible, adapting to extreme conditions, trusting instinct over impulse. That's the same adaptability you've cultivated, not loud, not proud, but highly attuned. You sense when to pause, when to speak, and when to move, not to impress, but to remain intact. Psalm 73:26 reminds us, "My flesh and my heart may fail, but God is the strength of my heart and my portion forever." That's the pulse beneath your endurance. Not your strategy, but your surrender. You have shown the world that scars can become signatures, that grief doesn't disqualify glory, that tenderness is a form of intelligence, and that staying open is a kind of strength the ego will never understand. And yes, maybe your path has been hidden. Maybe few ever said thank you, but heaven has been echoing your name in rooms you'll never enter. Matthew 6:4 declares, "Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you." That reward isn't always material. Often it's identity. It's remembering who you are after the world tries to make you forget. You don't need to manipulate the spotlight. You are the illumination, not through force, but frequency. And perhaps the real question is, what kind of world begins to unfold when more people choose to live as freely as you do now? Keep going, not because you're being watched, but because your path is becoming a sanctuary for others. You weren't sent here to convince. You were sent here to radiate, to live in a way that reminds others that truth is still possible, that integrity still breathes, and that the divine does its deepest work through vessels that have nothing to prove. And now that you've embodied this, the universe responds. It always has, not with noise, but with clarity. And so, dear chosen one, maybe you'll never hear them say it. Maybe there will never be a thank you note, a standing ovation, or even a whisper of acknowledgement. But that doesn't make your presence any less powerful. You are the quiet anchor in someone's storm, the hidden strength behind their persistence, the unspoken reason they still believe in goodness. And while they may not say it, you are the reason they haven't given up. Your existence is not accidental. It is a divine strategy. You were sent ahead like a forerunner, not to be praised, but to pave a way. And in doing so, you've become living proof that endurance has a heartbeat, that love can still be fierce and quiet at the same time, and that hope often wears the face of someone who simply didn't quit. So, hold your head high, not because they see you, but because God sees you. Heaven has witnessed your sacrifice, your silent prayers, your decision to show up, even when no one noticed. And trust me, it counted. Every time you chose love instead of bitterness, patience instead of anger, truth instead of silence, you were rewriting someone else's ending. Thank you for being here. Thank you for walking this sacred path, even when it was lonely. If this message touched something deep within you, please like this video, share it with someone who might be carrying quiet burdens, and subscribe so we can stay connected on this journey together. And if you feel led, drop a comment below with 777 to declare that you're still standing for yourself and for those who still can't. To everyone who's supported this message through a super thanks or simply by being present, your energy is deeply appreciated. This space exists because of souls like yours who believe in light even when the world grows dim. Until next time, may peace find you when the world is loud. May strength rise within you when no one else sees. And may you always remember, you matter more than they'll ever say. But heaven knows, and heaven never forgets. Stay blessed, stay chosen. Your light is changing lives, even in silence.